Radio Free Skaro!
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Radio Free Skaro, episode number 788. I am Stephen in Edmonton.
Warren in Vancouver.
And Chris in Edmonton.
This week we have a new thing, an interesting thing. We have a discussion with Tom Spilsbury and Derek Kompare about the current state of the media industry, where it's going, and what is Doctor Who's place in it. It's an interesting chat that I've had sort of on my mind for a while, and I sort of kicked it down the road a little bit because I've always wanted to have Derek Kompare on the show to talk about such things, and then because March has been a bit up in the air for this podcast, we're like, well, guess what? We're bringing it forward, and luckily enough, Derek was available, and he said we should find somebody from the UK, and I think, well, Tom Spilsbury writes all about viewing figures and stuff like that. Warren's favorite subject on
Oh boy.
Yep. So he's here as well.
Who are these fine people and why should we listen to them?
Well, Derek Kompare is like the professor of media arts at Southern Methodist University and is a fine chap who we've met, of course, in
Yes, he is. He is a fine chap. Yeah.
Tom Spilsbury, of course,
he's also the chair of his department.
That too. And Tom Spilsbury, of course, is the former editor of Doctor Who magazine. Was there for like 12 years, I think, basically. So
yeah.
So they got their fingers on the pulse. It was nice to sort of sit back and says, hey, I don't know quite what's going to be said here or where we're going, but I am interested to find out. And the great thing about doing a podcast is that you can go, hey, people who know what you're talking about, please come on the podcast and talk about what you know so that I can learn as well. But we can put it on the podcast instead. So it's a pretty handy thing having a podcast. You can have discussions that you would want to listen that you would want to listen to on a podcast.
And it doesn't have to be a true crime podcast either.
It doesn't have to
but
be.
it should be, though.
Yeah.
Somebody knows something. A CBC podcast.
Ooh.
By the way, spoilers, nobody on that show knows anything.
Nobody at all. No, I mean, in the news as well, we have stuff about perhaps on topic with what we're going to talk about later on in the panel. But But first, some Series 13 news regarding John Bishop. So John Bishop, apparently, there was a Zoom meetup, as all meetups are right now, but hopefully not for much longer. On February 18th, where he was sort of like, people asking questions about comedy, and of course Doctor Who came up, and he said some interesting things. Now, the article that we're linking to on Cultbox has some shooting spoilers, not the part that John Bishop talked about, just in general. So be warned about that. But the most relevant bit here is I'll read it out because it's important. So the process, this is John Bishop. The reason it came about is that Chris Chibnall met me. God even remembers when it was. He says when you can meet people, it was before last Christmas. So before Christmas of 2019, which would make me think it was probably just after they shot the end, like the revolution of the Daleks. I'm trying to think of when the timeline is. Then he says he had this idea, this is a character, he wanted to see a few things and blah, blah, blah. And he says he was flattered, but I didn't have the time. But then COVID happened, and then the window opened up for him. And then here's the interesting thing. They moved their filming dates to try and deal with it, and now it fitted perfectly. So he's filming it up to July, and then he's on the road into September. So that would seem to indicate that it's been... I'm trying to think of like when John Bishop was considered to be on Doctor Who in relation to like John Barrowman being shooting on the special and stuff. And the big thing here, the most concrete thing, is that Doctor Who seems to be aiming towards filming until July, which would probably indicate a fall premiere date.
I would think so, yeah.
Yeah, so...
I have to say, my boss texted me a few days ago and said, about this John Bishop guy, because he kind of is sort of interested in who, and I had to honestly think for a second as to who the hell John Bishop was. I just kind of forgot.
Yeah.
And also, I've keep mixing up whether that's the actor's name or the character's name, which tells you how much I care about John Bishop. I may completely recant this September or whenever the hell the show comes out,
right?
And he turns out to be a great companion or not. But at the moment, I just don't think about John Bishop all that much.
Yeah, because we didn't know who he was, and John Bishop. When you don't know who someone is,
it's a very character name.
It is a very character name. Yeah. So I'm curious because where was because if they talked to him before COVID, and it's not like say that was before COVID because we have to cover up the fact that we didn't have a finale scene for John Barrowman in Revolution of the Dow. I don't think there's anything like that going on here. So the fact that perhaps, I don't know. I don't know what happened. Why was there no goodbye scene for John Barrowman in Revolution of the Daleks? I need to know this.
That could be as easy as just they did the schedules. It could be something very simple.
Maybe he's still coming back in season 13.
He is not. I know this for sure. Just because he was doing an interview somewhere and he said, I'm filming something, but I can't tell what. And then he immediately says, you know what? No, I'm not doing Doctor Who because he's filming something that he can't talk about, but it's not Doctor Who is what he said because he didn't want to.
I don't know if it has been filmed or is yet to be filmed, but the last thing I heard him doing was some musicals. I think it might have been one-off. I don't know. Some musical show for like Channel 4 or something.
Oh,
well, that seems a little off-brand for John Barrow.
Right, ITV, I don't know.
Yeah, back to the egg for him. So sometime in 2019, possibly after. I'm curious. Who knows? Who knows? Who knows why there was no goodbye scene? But apparently, this has been in the works for a while. So. We'll see. Maybe one day it'll come up. Maybe when the Blu-ray set comes out in 2029 for Series 12 or 13 or whatever, when it's put together by Chris Chapman or something, he'll have this big documentary about the ins and outs of filming during COVID and everything like that. And maybe we can find all this out. So anyway, it was interesting. Like I said, though, I just read out the relevant bits. There are spoilery bits later on in the article itself. So
yes. Point being, he said no. Schedules changed. He said yes.
Yep. There you go. Because yes, so we can do COVID. I have literally nothing else I could do as a comic apart from like doing a Zoom stand-up session. Yes, I will be in your TV show. Yes, I will do that.
I keep seeing on Facebook. I keep seeing advertisements for Colin Mockery and Brad Sherwood doing like Zoom improv things.
Really?
Yeah. So I mean, stuff like that's happening. Mm-hmm. Obviously,
who's Brad?
I've tried watching Zoom improv and Zoom comedy, and it. I'll just leave it at that. How about that?
When it comes to things like comedy, stand up, anything like that, there's the energy from those around you and from the comic that is such a part of it that can't be replicated.
And we've had literally more than 100 years of stand-up. People know what to do and how to do it on stage, and it just kind of works. It's just like 24 frames a second for film. Should it be better? Yes. Or like, technically speaking, yes, it should. Right. But if you watch a film and it's 48 frames, for instance, you're like, something's not right here. Just like stand-up. But yes, you should be able to do it via Zoom, but it doesn't feel right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You would never believe, dear listener, that we were discussing The Hobbit just before recording, which I assume is why 48 frames per second, literally the only big budget film to ever be released in 48 frames per second is being brought up.
It's not the only one, if you want me to bore you to tears with Ang Lee's later output.
Didn't we look that up the other week?
Ang Lee did one at 120 frames.
We sure did look it up. We looked it up, and there was The Hobbit, and there was like 2 other films, and that was
Gemini Man, I think, might be 48.
No, it wasn't one of those. I don't think. Might have been. Who knows? Anyway, I there's probably a thing because Toby Haydock has been doing the Ex Malarkey every week on Twitch. They sort of settled into a groove there of doing it, and basically, it's kind of like a donation thing. Pay what it's free, but chip in.
I'm not against it. I want comedians to make money. I want people to be able to do this stuff. I think give it a year or two more. Not that I'm wishing a pandemic stretched out or anything. And people will figure out how to make this work, but it's as of right now, it's not there yet. You know what I mean?
Although, you know what? I might have said this before. If you're slightly off topic, we'll get back there, folks. Don't worry. This is a jam. I actually prefer Last Week Tonight with John Oliver without the crowd. I
that's
actually
true.
like it. Him being in front of the white void, and thinking it still works. It might even work a little bit better, and it's going to be weird to have an audience again for that show.
As much as I don't want to praise YouTubers, some of them have got this down.
Yeah.
Versus things like sporting events where the crowd is such a big part of it that's missed for sure.
Yeah, I know you're out this year, Chris, aren't you, for hockey? Just
I'm not even paying attention to hockey.
Come on, there's fake cheering, which actually kind of works as far as I'm concerned. But.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. Well, good thing you're checked because the Senators are pretty bad this year. But
they're horrible.
Yeah,
they're horrible.
But they're rebuilding.
But even things like was the Super Bowl where they had 20,000-30,000 in the crowd.
Yeah.
Probably was a big difference from zero.
It's weird, like the NHL will start like some places are, where it's apparently deemed safe to allow people back into the arena.
Yeah, Florida, Texas.
Pittsburgh
No,
and other places now too. And it just feels like it's. I guess I didn't, and this is sort of like tying into this COVID talk now, I guess. But I kind of like the vaccines. It's sort of been a gradual thing, and kind of like allowing people back into sports stadiums is a gradual. Like it's not like 0 to 18,000, all of it, 0 to sold out. No, it's like they're basically letting 1,200 people, 1,800 people, depending on where you are. It's been a lot more gradual. There's no montage at the end and then a big swell in a press conference to say, guess what, the pandemic is over. Life isn't like that. It's very strange. This is what I'm finding out about things right now in regards to the pandemic. I'm also finding out about BBC First. BBC First, it's a new television channel. Yeah.
I'm confused.
Coming to Canada. Well, it's coming to Canada first, or is it just Canada? It's just Canada. I'm sorry. I just had to step back because there's a BBC Studios press release and it's just talking about Canada. And I thought surely we're looped in with other countries in this, but no. Blue Ant Media expands partnership with BBC Studios to bring BBC First to Canada. No other countries mentioned in this press release. How fascinating. BBC First. So basically it is... it's going to be alongside BBC Canada, which has a
this
show.
This is confusing, like HBO Max, First, Go, Zip, Zap. I don't know what the hell's going on.
Yeah, I don't know.
So I'm just going to give up.
They're basically launching. It's going to have like it's a month-long nationwide preview event for those of you with cable and stuff from March 16th to April 16th. They'll have, this is the curious thing, because BBC Canada basically airs gardening shows produced in Canada, and the Graham Norton Show. And the Graham Norton Show is now showing up on BBC First. Like they have like Top Gear, they have the original Office, like, kind of archive stuff to start with.
Yeah, I was going to say, thank goodness we finally have a place to watch The Office from 20 years ago.
I know. Well, hey, people watched The Office from 10 years ago on the NBC.
I find it interesting BBC First has that, given that it's basically the linchpin of the Warner Brothers streaming service in the States.
No, that's The Office, the original and best UK version.
Oh, okay, never mind.
Yeah.
I still can't watch it. I have yet to make it, multiple attempts. I have yet to make it through the first episode of that show because it's just so dire.
Oh, well, others like it. So that's
others like it. Sorry, I don't like it.
I know.
Yes.
So that is a thing that's happening. An ad-supported TV channel called BBC First. What this means for the future, as this will sort of be addressed to not BBC First, but just in general, a TV station being created by the BBC to be airing in Canada. I only bring this up because broadcast and distribution deals have been signed with other companies regards to lots of things. Like for instance, Paramount Plus, with newly rebranded CBS All Access, it has Star Trek Discovery, except in this country.
What did Disney Plus just add? Star something?
Yeah, they added Star, which is basically
Hulu for not Americans.
Yeah,
but
like Paramount Plus is the home of Star Trek Discovery, except in the UK where it airs on Netflix because there was a deal that was signed before Paramount Plus came into being.
And here where it's Crave.
Here it's on Crave or CTV Sci-Fi. Boy. I wonder what's going on, because as we talk Canadian media landscape here for a second, bear with us. But
such as it is.
Bell Media, which owns many things in Canada, as including CTV Sci-Fi, have just been cutting and slashing media. They shut down 3 entire radio stations, sports radio stations in the past couple of weeks that they own. They laid a whole bunch of people off from their TV sports things. They're really cutting and slashing. And
the best part of it is it all came. All the announcements came very shortly after their Bell Let's Talk Day, which is
let's talk about getting fired. How about that?
Raise awareness for mental health.
Yeah, they waited.
My favorite is an email I got from a cable company that said, "We no longer carry fashion TV and book TV," which I checked are now Bell properties, even though they're originally City, because they no longer exist. I'm like, yeah, that sounds like Canadian TV in a nutshell.
Yeah, and so they also own CTV Sci-Fi, which was space, which had personality, and now it just feels like, as the name suggests, just another thing under the umbrella that they barely pay attention to. Like, I was looking at the Twitter feed, and
they're embarrassed by it. That's what I feel.
There's no interaction whatsoever. They have tweeted literally, I think, since the beginning of February, like 8 times. 8 times. It's basically say, hey, this thing is coming. Here it is. And that's it. Like, there's nothing. There's no engagement with that channel anymore.
That's a tax write-off. That's probably what it is.
It kind of is. It's kind of become that, and...
Like we said this off air, too. It's like, it feels like the executives are like the executives from 20, 30 years ago, when faced with a bunch of superhero movies in the 90s, were embarrassed to make them, but did because they made money. And this feels like kind of the same thing. Even though sci-fi is everywhere, these Canadian TV execs are like, oh, for sci-fi, I guess so. Now back to the reality programming.
Or they think they could just, we'll just put it on there and they won't care. And it's just like, it's kind of sad, like there's no personality to the streaming services, really. There's just like, here it is, there, find it, watch it, report back, keep watching things. Like, I don't know, there seems to be a disconnect between everything when it comes to the streaming and broadcast world, and it's kind of depressing. And the reason I bring it up is I wonder if
at least they're still showing Doctor Who
for now. How long will that,
for now,
how long will, Crave be a thing? Will HBO Max eventually sort of like launch? Because basically Crave is presenting everything that's on HBO in Canada, because that's a deal. But like, what if the HBO Max says, you know what, we want to control our own thing, and so we're just going to set up HBO Max in Canada if once a particular rights deal expires. And what does that mean for Crave? What does that mean for that whole wing of things? Does that mean, well, that's it for that? And then all the shows that Crave / Bell Media have picked up, like Star Trek Discovery, like Doctor Who, where do they go? Do they go to HBO Max? Do they go to BBC first? Because maybe the BBC says, hey, let's control our own program. Where do these things go? This is the thing about what.
Allow me to wax poetic for a second about Canadian TV. Back in the 80s and 90s, and this is where Space comes in, Moses Neimer, who basically founded Much Music and a whole bunch of other channels, including Space, probably not the nicest guy in the world, but he basically said to people, we have no money, but you have ultimate creative freedom. And a bunch of insane, cool stuff came out of primarily Much Music, but also Space and anything else and then all these corporate interests took it over, and we're just not, and part of that was because there was only the cable landscape to work with. And now that we've got these giant catalogs of stuff everywhere, that kind of blandifies everything in a way. You know what I mean?
It does.
And so a guy like Moses Neimer or somebody else now, although probably some kid on YouTube in like 2020 that I'm not watching is doing the same thing in some way, right? I'm looking in the wrong place, because TV is where you're going to find innovation anymore. Because it was only there in the first place because there was no choice. They had no money, but they had this platform that nobody else did. Well, it's the same thing online now, and not on streamers, but at other places.
Yeah, like so that's what kind of makes this, interesting. Why they're thinking, hey, now's the time. Now the iron is hot. Let's strike and launch a BBC first TV channel with mostly archive.
Fighting the last
talent.
war. That's what that is.
Yeah. I'm intrigued to see what's on. I mean, it's you look at it. I mean, I worked in the TV industry, so did Warren. This is why we speak of with some disdain of the thing. But I remember when I worked, I wasn't in the traffic department, but you could see the scheduling, and this is how it sort of worked, and like this. And now you go, like, you sift through the cable guide, and it's like copy and paste. It's just like, here are our 3 movies that we're airing this week, and we're just going to air them back to back to back and swap them around a little bit.
And they're one channel of 50 that shows Next Generation.
Yeah, it's just
on the other hand, 10 years ago, or probably even sooner, I remember myself at least and various others saying, you know, if we could just get a BBC channel in Canada, and now we got, what, 2 of them?
Yeah, no,
and we're complaining.
But
even like 10, 15 years ago, there was still BBC Canada, BBC Kids, and
I suppose that's true.
You know, BBC Kids was the one showing Doctor Who, not BBC Canada.
It's hilarious, you know. And then I saw, I can't even remember which was streaming service. I think it was Netflix. I think it was Netflix actually, or Prime, or some other one. Basically, they were thinking, what if we had a slightly cheaper tier with ads? And thinking, we are just full on recreating
that was
cable.
Paramount Plus.
It was Paramount Plus. We are full on just recreating cable. We're just doing it. We're just recreating cable, except instead of paying like $40 for a whole package, you're basically, here's $10 for one channel. It's like
Hulu's done the same thing for a while as far as like ads or no ads for different pricing.
Anyway, I wonder where Doctor Who will find a home, because you know, I mentioned this in the panel about how people will watch it in the States on BBC America, but like it's chopped up, it's ads, there's, you know, it's not the genuine pure actually watching experience, and I'm wondering how many people wait the next day, buy it on iTunes, or wait till it's all on HBO Max 3 or 4 months later and just watch the whole series that way. I mean, this is how people are watching these things now.
Yeah, insert talk about overnight viewing figures here.
They don't matter anymore as much.
No.
You know.
Yeah.
Anyway,
but as long as it has a home, that's the most important thing. But by the same token, it doesn't. You don't want it to flip from channel A to channel B to channel C every year, because people are going to become apathetic about following it and finding it.
Mm-hmm. So it's curious. I'm curious to see how this channel goes, because, you know, they're making a big thing of it. I say big thing. The studios themselves have put out a press release about their own product. I haven't seen it being mentioned that much in the media yet. I'm curious to see what the schedule will be like on the March 16th when this thing goes live. I'm the only one of the three of us that has cable, so I guess I'm the reliable source on this one. So I'll get back to you.
Cable. I have basic and I have news.
Well, you don't have BBC First then, probably, Warren.
That's probably not. No.
Yeah.
And
so
speaking of Netflix and other stuff, just to throw it out there for those who have started their hate mail to me about dissing The Office. For those who haven't yet watched Afterlife on Netflix starring Ricky Gervais, it is fantastic.
Oh, well,
no, it has Ricky Gervais in it, therefore it is not fantastic.
Actually, it is.
So send hate mail to me, because I can't stand that guy.
I know you hate him. Yeah.
I didn't mind extras, but I find him annoying as hell otherwise.
He's very.
There's a lot of carryover from the extras cast to this.
Oh, is it really? Oh, Carl Pilkington. No, he's not in that.
No, Pilkington.
I will say that the Fluid Links Lego Telesnap versions was basically directly inspired by the Ricky Gervais show with the animated things. That's where I got the idea from. So I copied from Ricky Gervais. So what do you think about that now, Warren? What do you think?
I think you took crap and made it good. How about that?
Well, that's awfully kind of you. Yeah. It was a lot of it was probably a lot harder to animate than it was to do telesnap versions of it. But I will tell you this: it still took a long time to do the Lego telesnap versions.
Fairly recently, we rewatched some of the Christopher Guest mockumentaries because we watched all of Schitt's Creek. And I had such a hankering to watch A Mighty Wind, because that's my favorite.
That's a good one.
Eugene Levy.
That's a good one.
Favorite Eugene Levy and Catherine O'Hara stuff from the mockumentaries. But we also watched For Your Consideration, and Ricky Gervais is in that, and he is not good.
I have not seen For Your Consideration. That's not quite the mockumentary style, though, is it? That one.
It's not.
It is.
Yeah,
is it? Okay.
It's a bit less though. It's more filmy.
It is, and they're also like more names in it as well.
Yeah, well, which is kind of, it's about showbiz, so yeah. If you'll allow me a telesnap plug, everyone go to YouTube and check out Freiburg's media channel with Broton, Middle Management Zygon, episode 1, which after telling Stephen about years ago, I have finally actually made.
Many years ago, yep. It's out there now.
It's quite silly.
It's out there now. Speaking of TV channels and stuff, and regressing perhaps, I don't know. BBC Three, everyone. BBC Three is coming back to TV, and it's about time. It's not really. There's no Doctor Who on it, but BBC Three, as you recall, moved online. 6 years? I can't believe it was 6 years.
5
ago.
years
Which
ago.
seems sort of ahead of its time, really.
It did, but it failed. It apparently failed, and so they're saying let's bring it back. We're putting it on TV. So
they're not using the word failed. I personally think I'm classifying it as a failed experiment.
a mea culpa.
Reading the BBC News article, it basically goes, well, young people are moving away from linear in droves, but we're going to make this appeal to young people and put it on linear. I'm like, this sounds just like the TV discussion we just had about how TV execs have not a clue what the hell they're doing.
I know. I do.
Well, they shifted it to save money,
Yeah.
allegedly, and
That makes
probably
sense.
did. And then, like, what? Now they have more money to play with, or like,
But I
I'm
don't-
not sure. I'm not sure I completely understand all the rationale behind
Pretty sure they don't completely
undoing the
understand.
decision.
Well, they're basically sharing the British television works differently than North American television. In that in North America,
Yes.
there's things on 24/7. The in the UK, and Warren and I were like flummoxed by this. They go, "What do you mean it's starting at 7:00? Programming starts at 7:00 in the evening? What is it?" So basically, CBBC will close shop early, and then that transmission window will be BBC Three's after that. Is how it works.
The way it works for them is there's the broadcast bandwidth for the channels, and they'll have a channel on for a certain chunk of the day, and then
Right.
shut that off and reallocate that bandwidth for a different channel. Like BBC 4 doesn't come on air until 7 p.m.
Yeah.
CBBC used to shut down at 7, then they switched to 9. Now they're going back to 7, and BBC 3 doesn't come on until 7 o'clock or whatever it is. But it's actually kind of smart, though, how they're using these limited resources to have more stuff available,
I suppose
or to
so.
have stuff in general.
Yeah. So no word on Class season 2 coming to BBC Three
Or Torchwood, revamp.
or that, but yeah, January 22, BBC Three back on TV. I am actually genuinely curious if, kind of like vinyl has sort of had a massive resurgence as well and is now a thing. Will there be a certain like turn back thing? And remember when we didn't have to choose? We didn't have to scroll through Netflix for an hour and a half looking for something to watch and then eventually not watch anything. Remember we could just turn the TV on and says, what's on? Oh, this is fun. Let's all watch this. I'm wondering if there will be like a bit of like a turn back to the time of curated television, curated streaming services, basically, where things will stream, but you don't get
They're
to
already
choose
doing
what.
that.
Yeah, they're Pluto
Criterion
TV.
is that. Shudder does that too. That's the best thing about Shudder is all the curated stuff by real horror fans.
But like, it airs at a time. Like Pluto TV, it's like, oh, sometimes someone will watch, like in the States. We don't have the Doctor Who element on Pluto TV here. But, like, oh, the Sunmakers is on right. Yeah, let's just turn on the Sunmakers because there's a certain genuine thrill of...
Shudder
had
does that
that
too.
Yeah.
We had that a bit with Twitch when they ran Doctor Who.
They did, because it's like, oh,
Kind of.
when's it on? When's the chase running? We have to watch Ian say London 1965. It was a
Well,
massive
Crave,
thing.
I never use this feature, but Crave does that too. You can go on to their on-air stuff and watch it. I just never got around to it because it's kind of buried somewhere near the back, but you can
Right.
go on and watch on-air
Yeah.
live streaming stuff from 4 or 5 channels.
There's a I wonder I that's not nostalgia. I think it's just genuine, like people who have grown up streaming and not been able to think of things to watch. All of a sudden, maybe they'll turn back and go, "What the hell? There's this new
Maybe,
thing."
but the big difference these days is going to be back in the day, you only had a few channels to pick from. Now you have basically an infinite number
Yeah.
of channels. So people might do that, but they're unlikely to land up on the same channel.
No.
But even without ratings, there's still big premiere stuff. Like I think from what I've read for the last 2 weeks, Disney's had problems with streaming it early in the morning because that's when WandaVision drops, the new episode, and people wait till midnight or whatever time it is for them and watch it then. And that's actually put serious network trouble on Disney Plus. So people are still kind of almost in a way replicating that old premiere thing.
Which is probably interesting because they probably picked, basically the middle of the night because people are unlikely to be waiting for it to drop at that
But
moment and
it
just
has
watch it after.
stopped true fans, I guess.
True fans. Yeah, the true fans are the ones who stay up till 3 a.m. Eastern time to watch a new episode drop.
Well,
or
I
something.
didn't. But yeah,
Well, then you're not as big a fan, obviously.
I guess
That's
not.
the thing.
I guess
Yeah.
I failed.
Yep.
You're more of a man, don't, Lorian.
It was truly terrible. Now I have to pick up the pieces and move on to the next thing, which is the season 8 Blu-ray. It's officially released on March 8th in the UK, of course. People have already got it, though, thanks to early postal delivery. There's a new trailer, a new fancy cinematic trailer. That's
After all our crap talking at TV, the best thing about this trailer is how they use the interview from the Devil's End guy as a way to tie it all together.
Mm-hmm.
Back when Doctor Who predicted BBC Three when there wasn't yet a BBC
That's true. How fateful is that? The return of BBC Three to Devil's End. We get it June 1st. That's when we get the season 8.
We do.
Blu-ray.
And still no announced date in North America for season 24.
Nope. But it's there. It's pre-ordered. I got it pre-ordered. Who knows when we'll get it? But yeah. So looking forward to them.
I'm in no particular rush to get season 24. I'll admit. But,
I am.
The pre-order is there.
I am. 8 discs. I actually I was looking at my DVD shelf, my DVD and Blu-ray shelf, I should say. And I actually looked at the Doctor Who website to see how many discs were in each, because I think the season 10 one was 7 discs or 6. Anyway, the point is it fit in a regular size Blu-ray case, but the 8 disc ones fit in a larger one. So I got stand-ins. I used my Prisoner box set for season 8 and my Robin of Sherwood box set for season 24, because they were both 8 discs, just to see what my shelf would look like when these two sets are in my possession, thus pulling out the old DVDs of the previous ones. So yeah, I'm
Have you what are you doing with your old DVDs?
I'm keeping them for now.
Are you just like throwing them in a box into a closet?
They're in a drawer or something. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I've kind of, I have,
Or something is the operative word.
or something. I have ripped them all just because I want, digital copies of everything just in case, or just to have for fun, because we do commentaries and stuff and everything else. And so I have those for that. So why have you got a set plan for your DVDs there, Chris?
No, they're just sitting on a bookshelf.
Sitting on a bookshelf.
Same bookshelf as the Blu-rays are.
Yeah.
But they're just sitting there.
I don't know.
Gathering dust. Basically.
I don't know what to do with them. Because they're history. They're treasured history right there,
They are, and they're not. I mean, between things like the Blu-rays coming out and then the print on demand stuff.
Oh yeah,
that's been coming out over the last couple of years. There's much less of a resale market for them. Because things like War Games and Battlefield and whatever that went, Two Doctors especially that went out of print and commanded high resale values on eBay. Like that's less of a thing now. So it's not like I'm going to sell them. I don't think I'd sell them anyway.
No, I wouldn't either. I feel it's not like you can like cart them off to Gallifrey One and like here I'm giving away 140 DVDs. Try fitting that in the overhead compartment.
Charity auction, maybe, but they're probably not going to fetch that much these days.
No,
certainly not the $20 or $30 or $40 a piece that we paid back in the day.
Oh, back in the day.
And I got a few too of the old ones, just sitting in a ottoman, forgetting I own.
Yeah, but you don't update yours with the Blu-rays.
No, I haven't bothered.
No,
they're all on BritBox, the classic stuff anyway.
All the stuff that you care about. With your watching of things and your lack of production notes and your lack of extras and stuff.
All he cares about
I like how I'm being fan-shamed for this.
Yeah.
Why don't you look at minutia?
All he cares about is the 5 Doctors and Pyramids of Mars. And
That's
Talons.
it.
Yeah.
I'm a bad fan. I even had the shirt, or I did have the shirt anyway.
It's going to look great. Also, a new Doctor Who magazine has come out. It's mostly focusing on Daleks and dream worlds and comics and art and everything. As a whole thing in there. Plus, there's one of the new Gav Reimal moon-based recreations for the studio floor plans, which I find fascinating, is in there as well. Next month, though, next issue, I should say, 563, interview with Christopher Eccleston, because, of course, on the horizon is the Doctor Who The Ravagers, the details of which came out this past week, due for release in May 2021. It's a three-story box set called The Ravagers, or Ravagers, I should say. Sphere of Freedom, Cataclysm, Food Fight, all written by Nicholas Briggs. You can pre-order them on disc, on vinyl. There's that vinyl again, or as I did back in July when it was announced, on digital download. So all this is building up to the release of the Christopher Eccleston stuff. So it's exciting. It's kind of exciting. having the return of Eccleston. I also mentioned that the Target book, which came out in 2016 was the last version of it, the hardback. It's now in paper book from Telus Publishing. So links in the show notes if you want to order that in paperback.
Yeah, the paperback is just a paperback reprint of what came before. So it does not have like all the new like Rose and Dalek and Day of the Doctor,
Witchfinders, that stuff. Yeah.
But as a bookist, this is where I become a completionist. Sometimes you got everything in paperback and you want to have more stuff in paperback so it matches on the shelf. Yes, I understand.
Oh, yes. Paperback just feels, well, I don't know. I'm of two minds about it now. Just like
it depends. It depends on what the thing is.
Yeah.
If it's in fact, actually, here's the thing. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, a film I didn't love, but it was okay. Right. Quentin Tarantino is actually putting out a novelization of it, which is going to expand upon. And I was like, God. You know what? Nobody does novelizations. What the hell? It's $7. I'm buying it. So in June when it comes out, I'm going to check it out. So
interesting.
That's something where you want to have a paperback because it feels like the old paperbacks of yore.
Does it describe Brad Pitt with like an open, pleasant face or something like that?
No idea.
It's a novelization.
So.
Yeah.
It describes him with a wheezing, groaning sound.
There's a lot of wheezing and groaning in that movie.
Actually, ghostwritten by Terrence Dix from Beyond the Grave. That's how this works. Or actually, more accurately, Quentin Tarantino stealing from Terrence Dix.
That's it. Yeah, even the novelization is something that Quentin Tarantino can't even do originally. He probably is just going to like mimic a 1978 Terrence Dix Target novelization.
I mean, he's probably going to mimic some novelizations he loved as a kid. And as a guy who used to read movie novelizations in the time before VCRs, and I know some of you old codgers are with me on this, I'm like, I can't resist this, even if it is a movie I don't really care about.
I have a distinct memory of reading the novelization of the 1989 Batman film before seeing the movie.
Whoa. Like the Five Doctors came out.
Alan Dean Foster and George Lucas.
That's true. Star Wars came out before Did they come out before the movie? It did, didn't it?
I believe so, yeah. The storybook did, so I was very confused.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know what all this stuff is, but okay.
Five Doctors did too. I'm assuming the Empire Strikes Back stuff didn't come out before the movie, but you never know back in 1980.
Maybe. People were a lot more fast and loose back then.
I know. I wouldn't be surprised if Mark Hamill just like on Phil Donahue or something just like dropped, oh, by the way, Darth Vader's my father. Oh, I wasn't supposed to say that. Nobody cared.
Also, everyone was high. Probably not Mark Hamill, but all the executives were probably high.
It was the 1980s. Anyway, other big Finnish news. This is so. I like how this sort of became like, on a whim. Emily Cook tweeted this out. It was like how it started, how it is now. Where Russell T Davies, during one of the tweet-alogs, basically said, "Look what I found! My very first Doctor Who script from 1986, which I sort of had in mind to send to the BBC. And because Big Finish is Big Finish, they are now making this into an actual story. The Lost Stories Mind of the Hodiak, which is coming out at some point in the
probably 2022.
Probably 2022. You can pre-order it though. You can pre-order this Russell T Davies thing. I think has he actually written or has it been adapted? Because I know oftentimes these sort of things.
He co-wrote it with Scott Hancock.
Oh, Scott Hancock. There we go. Perfect. That's cool. I mean, sometimes it's like, oh, here's this thing. Do you want to have it? And then someone else will sort of like rewrite it and stuff. But so that's kind of cool.
The cover art for it features a Sontaran and Melker.
Ooh.
That's a crossover you didn't know you needed.
No, but I do need it badly. You can.
Where's my slip back adaptation, which was audio to begin with?
That's the thing. I'm surprised in a way that they haven't redone slip back as well because it's right there.
Or the Pescatons, or
Or at least re-released it. Pescatons and like has that been released?
That's probably just an ownership / rights thing.
I guess so. Yeah.
Or what was Barry Letz's?
Paradise of Death, right?
Sure.
Yeah, I can't remember now. Anyway, Ghosts of End of Space, those two, yeah. Also, Time Lord Victorious, which I guess more or less wrapped up at the end of the calendar year last year, had one element of it held over because they were originally part of the whole multi-platform release of it was going to be an exclusive to Asda stores vinyl release. Well, the pandemic happened and people didn't go to as many Asda stores, so Asda held it back. And now it's coming out anyway in April on a vinyl. Time Lord Victorious: Echoes of Extinction.
My favorite thing about the cover is how Budget Ultron is on the left-hand side.
So it is. It's got Paul McGann and David Tennant in it, though. So that's exciting.
That's true.
Full
Who
cast.
should have been in Age of Ultron. Just say. As the doctors.
Both of them. Why not? Yeah.
And also apparently Bern Gorman and Arthur Darvill.
Yep, they're in there too. So that's exciting. Very exciting stuff. So finally,
as each other.
Yeah, finally it comes to a head. You can get a digital download and pre-order it as well. So in April. So there it is. That's it for the news. After the break, as we teased way back at the beginning of this epic length podcast, a media discussion panel about where Doctor Who fits in the media world with Derek Kompare and Tom Spilsbury right after the break. Welcome back. So on this podcast, we've often veered into discussions of streaming and broadcasting and viewing figures with regards to Doctor Who and other shows. So we figured it was time to have a proper panel on this with people who know what they're talking about. I'm not sure where the destination is here, but I am looking forward to the journey. So with that, I want to welcome on the former editor of Doctor Who magazine and someone who still contributes to the magazine, especially when writing about Doctor Who viewing figures, Tom Spilsbury. Hello, Tom.
Hello there. Hi.
Hello. And a chair and associate professor of film and media arts at Southern Methodist University and frequent contributor to the academic panel at Gallifrey 1, Derek Kompare. Hello, Derek.
Hello. How are you?
I'm well. We're all very well. We're here talking about Doctor Who and streaming and media stuff, and I'm intrigued to see where this goes. But I'll start with you, Tom. I'll ask Derek to expand on this bit here. But like here in North America, TV viewing has become very fragmented since 2005, especially going off on Netflix and everything. It's not just broadcast TV anymore. With a lot of the notable content going to like HBO, Netflix, and the like. So, Tom, what is the media industry like in the UK? Has it sort of mirrored North America in that regard?
Yes, I think it has. Obviously, the UK does have some notable differences to America and other parts of the world. But, here in the UK, we still have a sort of notional 5 terrestrial channels. I say that's notional because obviously the idea that you can only get those 5, initially way back in the 60s, there were only 2 channels, and then, it gradually sort of expanded. But of course, we can all get a lot more channels than that. But we still... the big channels are still BBC One and ITV, and then to a slightly lesser extent, BBC Two, Channel 4 and Channel 5, and they're the 5, as I say, inverted commas, terrestrial channels. But anyone who buys television now, you automatically get, dozens, hundreds even of other channels. So it's more sort of habit, I suppose, that people... still watch BBC One and ITV in larger numbers. They are the big boys, if you like. But that's gradually changing. We have seen, even over the last year or so, here's a good example, something like All Creatures Great and Small. There was a reboot of All Creatures Great and Small, which was done for Channel 5. Mm-hmm. And that got some terrific viewing figures for Channel 5, which would look very respectable, would look good viewing figures for BBC One. It was got over 5 million viewers, probably more than that once you count repeats and things which weren't counted within the first week or so. So yes, it's gradually changing, but the traditions of the past are still, they still play a role. We still do go back to BBC One for our news and some of the bigger shows that we're used to watching on those channels.
Mm-hmm. So, Derek, was my explanation of North American TV accurate there in regards to how splintered it's become?
Absolutely. I think the big difference, I think, in North America is that a lot of the sorts of splintering, fragmentation that's been going on has been going on a bit longer over here. So it's you have to go back to really the 60s, 70s, and 80s. We saw these sort of broad shows that were sort of meant for large audiences because that was the only networks that were attracting advertisers at that sort of scale. And ever since the 80s, when cable really started coming in, slowly at first and just kind of been building up with cable and now streaming. That's where most of the audience has been. In fact, most of the audience has been watching not the broadcast TV since the late 90s. It crossed over that mark right at the end of the 90s. So it's been quite a long time since most of the audience has been there for the broadcast networks. Now, that said, I do agree with Tom, though, that on any given night, you'll have more people, more viewers on a typical night watching one of the broadcast networks, whatever programming is on, than almost anything else that's on any of the cable networks. The issue is when you accumulate those audiences, there's overwhelmingly more people that are not watching broadcast TV than are watching it. So we've had this big migration away. And so the things that are left on broadcast TV are really the things that are kind of designed to get larger audiences. And at this point, because so much has been pulled away by cable and streaming, the only things that are left that really get reliably large enough audiences, and I'm talking the audiences that make advertisers really want to pay attention, that kind of can command a little bit of the pop culture and everything. The only kinds of genres that do that reliably are reality shows, sports. Obviously, the NFL is a massive driver of that in this country, and crime shows, crime procedurals, basically. And that's why you go through the primetime schedule. And it's been a staple for decades and decades, but I think never more so than now. That's kind of like the default kind of base bedrock, if you will, of primetime network TV in this country. If it's scripted, the only thing that's even moving the needle at all on network TV is police procedurals, maybe a few sitcoms, but the heyday of the sitcoms being really, commanding the ratings is long over as far as the broadcast networks go. So yeah, it's a lot of the action's over on streaming and cable, and broadcast networks just have a different kind of function these days than the sort of programming that would generate something like Doctor Who.
Yeah, and on the topic of Doctor Who, because that's where we are here. When Doctor Who came back in 2005, in the UK especially, it was almost like this sort of renaissance of like Saturday night family TV, and it kind of kicked the door open, I think, for a lot of other Merlin and Robin Hood and those kind of shows like that sort of became a thing on accessible BBC One television. But now, as we are talking in 2021. Doctor Who is like the only sort of genre show it's now an outlier. It's the only one that's really on like BBC One, like publicly available TV. Everything else is on Disney Plus or Paramount Plus for Star Trek and stuff. So how do you feel? Is Doctor Who sort of like still sort of being the vanguard of like sort of like accessible mainstream family drama, or is it sort of becoming an outlier and that all the other genre stuff have gone off to their own streaming services?
Well, in the UK, I think there's a slightly sort of different sort of attitude as to where Doctor Who fits anyway, because perhaps in the States it's seen more as a sort of genre show, which it is. It has that side to it. But I think, funnily enough, in the UK, perhaps because it goes right back to the 60s and it's been something which is, as parents and grandparents, they all have their own memories of watching it. It's sort of, I don't think it's thought of as sort of like a specialist show in quite the same way. It's obviously had its peaks and troughs. It's had its times where it's been more popular, times where it's been less popular. But it's a sort of constant in the UK, and everyone recognises what it is and understands it, probably in a way that even something like His Dark Materials, which is the current adaptation airing on the BBC, is probably, it's adapted from the books and is reasonably well known, but it's not sort of, part of the national consciousness in quite the same way. So the way that, Doctor Who, of course, you're quite right. You said it came back in 2005 and it was sort of part of slightly rejuvenating that Saturday evening audience. There were a few other things as well. Strictly Come Dancing was also around that time and that played a huge part as well. But, it's sort of families watching together and all of that. But of course, now it's sort of slightly odd because it's moved to a Sunday night, slightly different part of the TV watching week. And it's also, you can see if you look at the breakdown of when people are watching, they're not necessarily watching on the Sunday night. They're watching, throughout the rest of the week, catching up. And I do wonder exactly where Doctor Who does fit into a regular schedule now. It's a tough question, and I'm not sure it's one that the BBC necessarily has the perfect answer to either.
That's really interesting. It's almost mirroring what happened to Doctor Who in the 80s in some way, the sort of crisis now of it had been a staple on Saturdays for so long, in both the 20th century and the 21st century. And now there's uncertainty about what that means, and the possibility of, well, do we move that around and the audience is just going to find it where it is, or in our area now where the audience is just going to watch it whenever they want to anyway, or at least a sizable proportion of the audience. And so I think that's, the larger story here is obviously the whole idea of scheduling, the whole idea of the broadcast schedule is really, really fading fast. I had a massive epiphany the other day in the middle of my class when I was teaching. We're looking at the network's websites. I had a hell of a time finding the schedule grid on any of the main broadcast networks. It was more like, here's a show, rather than this show is on 9:00 on Thursday nights. It was like none of that. It was just like, here's a show. Maybe they'll say the new episodes are available on Thursdays. But the whole idea of, again, aside from sports and aside from events programming, the whole idea of marshaling an audience to show up at a particular time and date on a particular channel is really going away. And a lot of viewers, particularly younger viewers, are defaulting to this idea, well, it's available at this point on demand, and I'll just watch it when I get around to it, or I'll just watch it, at this point. And rather than it's Saturday night, it's Doctor Who time and everything. And so that's a massive cultural shift in the way in which we're taking on media. And so I just wonder, is that going to change what Doctor Who means? Is it going to feel a bit more like a streaming show than a kind of populist broadcast show as a result of kind of coming to terms with that? And I think we're in the middle of these changes, so it's kind of hard to tell. But I would have to think that those discussions and things are being contemplated in anybody making television these days.
Mm-hmm. I mean, with regards to Doctor Who being on Sundays now, were they sort of chased out of their own neighborhood, so to speak? Like, they used to own Saturday nights since 2005, but then it sort of slowly became sort of the area of like the Strictly Come Dancing, the sort of reality talent shows.
I think there are lots of things going on simultaneously, so it's quite hard sometimes to sort of pick on, a specific thing, because it's also influenced by other factors as well. So we can try and look at what some of those factors are individually, and try to make sense of them. I mean, when Doctor Who was still being shown on Saturdays, which it was right up until the end of the Peter Capaldi episodes, it was increasingly becoming clear that the live figure, and I don't even mean the overnight figure. Often you see overnight figures quoted, but the overnight figure would include the people who watched live, but also watched later that evening. Mm-hmm. So the live figure, people who were literally watching it live as it went out, was becoming quite small. That makes sense for something, the obvious things that you would watch live as opposed to catching up later are the things what would be the point of catching up later, things like sport, things like the news, because, once they've stopped being live, they stop having that sort of interest. So certainly compared to that, and even to a certain extent, things like reality shows, dancing shows, singing shows, although they do get a fair amount of catch up. You can decide to watch your Strictly Come Dancing later on a Saturday night. It might be on a bit early for you, so maybe we're eating dinner at 6:30, 7 o'clock. So we'll watch it 2 hours after everyone else. So that sort of thing happened. But I think with Doctor Who, it was increasingly becoming clear that it wasn't picking up the live audience on a Saturday night. It got quite a good later in the evening audience, and it got a big jump on Sundays throughout the day as people were watching the episode from Saturday night. Interestingly, now it's gone to Sundays. That live figure has gone up a bit because I think more people, they're staying in on a Sundays, and I'm talking pre-pandemic here. People would often go out more on Saturdays than they would on Sundays. So that live figure has gone up. But the catch-up figure has dropped comparatively because the people who might have watched it on a Sunday when it went out on a Saturday are now watching it on a Sunday when it goes out on a Sunday. So the thing is, you can't create new viewers out of nowhere. All that's happening is you're moving when they're watching it. So I think we're increasingly getting to the point where, scheduling can make a bit of a difference, but in the end, you can't make people watch a show that they don't want to watch. You're going to have a certain number of viewers, and they'll watch it either on the night it goes out, or the night after it goes out, or maybe a few days later. But one way or another, those are the viewers you have. So you can perhaps make it more noticeable by putting it in a good slot. That's still important. I think that's your shop window. People who might just be channel hopping and browsing and get drawn in. But increasingly, we're finding people watch the shows that they really want to watch. And appointment to view now means I'm going to make my appointment to view when I want to watch it. That's what that means now, rather than when you tell me I have to watch it.
Yeah, the one thing that I miss about any other show is what I like about Doctor Who is because of the appointment viewing thing. I think Doctor Who trends on Twitter because everyone is watching it at the same time and can sort of react to it at the same time, as opposed to, the conversation around streaming shows where, most people are saying I have to stay off Twitter until I watch this episode of WandaVision or something like that until they can watch it. And everyone's watching it at different times. So, and there might even be 2 or 3 episodes behind. So there's no central conversation about it. And that's one thing that I'm worried about if and when Doctor Who just goes to sort of streaming, is that we'll lose that sort of instantaneous conversation. Is that a thing that you sort of foresee happening?
Well, I don't know whether, it's 2 separate questions, really. Do I foresee it sort of going to sort of streaming full stop rather than traditional broadcast media? And if it does, what sort of effects that will have? It's impossible to answer this question without looking at the wider question of the role of the BBC and where that's going, because where the BBC might be in another 5 years or 10 years, that's going to be crucial to where Doctor Who fits into that version of the BBC. So, we're into the realms of speculation a little bit, but we're and certainly some rather bigger questions. I do think that Doctor Who is something which is, in a sort of pop culture way, it's very helpful to have as part of your TV lineup. What's also interesting is that a few years back, say around 2007, 2008, when Doctor Who had been back for a while, it was sort of leading the way with people watching after the transmission. We were starting to see big jumps for the consolidated figures. You get your overnight figure, and then you'd sort of see some sort of record-breaking jumps in some cases for episodes which would be seen after the Saturday transmission. What's happening now a little bit is that Doctor Who isn't leading the way in that regard anymore. The things that are really leading the way are sort of some of these box set dramas that really get that sort of word of mouth. We've seen quite a few of these recently. In 2021 alone, we've seen The Serpent with Jenna Coleman, of course. That was all put on iPlayer in one big go, as a box set. And so the sort of the linear, transmission figures are sort of almost redundant now, because by the time it was actually shown on TV, you'd already had 5 or 6 million people who watched it on iPlayer. It's hard for Doctor Who can't really get that word of mouth thing anymore, because people already know what Doctor Who is. You can't really say to people, have you heard of this show called Doctor Who? Because people generally have. What you're finding is that it's the kind of shows that people haven't necessarily heard of. Wow, have you seen this thing called The Serpent? Or have you seen, there's a few things, ITV's done a few as well and had success. The Bay and Finding Alice have both gone with the same approach. They've all been put on the online streaming before the transmission. So that's where we're sort of seeing huge figures before transmission, which, of course, Doctor Who's never done. We've never had episodes going up online before transmission, or at least not officially. We've had some unfortunate leaks, which we won't talk about. But so and part of that's a practical thing as well, because Doctor Who is often produced very close to transmission, so they'll be working on the effects and the final dub and the music and everything pretty much up to the last possible second. So the idea of putting a whole series up before any of it has been broadcast I think would be sort of robbing them of a good few weeks of extra time they can be making the episodes even better. Whereas with serials, with something like those shows I was mentioning, where it's kind of one ongoing story, they kind of know that a lot of people are going to want to go straight on to the next one. Doctor Who isn't usually that sort of show.
Mm-hmm.
They're generally more episodic. So, so although there are those of us who would watch them all, back to back if we had the opportunity to, I don't think it's necessarily the kind of show which you have to, I must find out what happens next. It's a different sort of thing. So that's a very waffly and roundabout sort of way of trying to answer some of those questions. But as I say, I think there's lots of different questions wrapped up in that.
There is. Derek, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating too, because when you're talking about what was the sort of show that people were watching simultaneously and everything, and the only show on this side of the Atlantic that I can think about that did that in the last few years seemed to be Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
On a scripted level, so that if you were following that show, you wanted to stay off of social media when it was airing on the East Coast and such. But that's pretty much it. Everything else has been a niche kind of thing, and even Doctor Who over here. So many people that have come into the show as fans in the last 15 years. It's interesting that they haven't come into it sort of watching it weekly. It's more likely that they've come into it having, initially the DVDs in the 2000s, or encountering on a Netflix or Amazon or wherever, watching episode after episode, and then getting on to, once they're caught up, then they'll wait for the new season, which is the way that so many iconic shows over the last 15 years built their audiences. I mean, that's exactly how Mad Men and Breaking Bad built their audiences, for example, that people would catch up on previous seasons, and then, once they're caught up, then they would be waiting for the current season. I think Doctor Who is so different from that. It's a unique thing. Even in the British context, it's a unique thing, but it's absolutely, there's nothing like it there's no equivalent to that on the American side right now, of a program that's that sort of iconic and symbolic, if you will, of a kind of idea of culture, that the weekly broadcast itself as a kind of ritual that you want to sustain and everything. It doesn't really have an equivalent over here. So I would imagine, on the British end, that is, as long as it still has that function for the BBC and that can be sustained, and as long as there's still that sort of energy with it, I would imagine, even after so many other things have gone to this model of either doing the full season drop and then being transmitted, or just the full season drop, if even after that point where so much has gone that way, I would imagine Doctor Who would be one of the very last shows to do that if it had to, just because of this history, because of this sort of legacy of this is the way in which Doctor Who is typically been consumed. We don't have the multi-part stories anymore, even not like we did in the classic era. We don't have them that frequently. But still there is that expectation, I think not only of fans, but I would imagine of the general audience too, of, well, it's what's happening next week on Doctor Who, and, what's going to be in the next episode and everything. And all that is lost if it's all done in one drop and everything. If it's designed to be consumed in one drop, all that is lost. So, it's fascinating because it's an industrial question, it's a cultural question, it's a storytelling question, because how you're structuring the entire season and how you're structuring individual stories, that changes radically if your episodes are going to show up weekly versus they're going to show up in one full drop. So, Doctor Who. I mean, every story, every showrunner's having these discussions and deep thoughts about it these days. But I would imagine, again, Doctor Who is one I think is going to be holding out as long as it can in the mode of delivery that it has until it might become untenable. And that's just, again, speculation, but it does seem to be where things are headed, that we're more and more headed in terms of scripted TV that gets a large audience.
Mm-hmm. Focusing on North America, specifically the U.S., and with BBC America, which makes a big thing of airing Doctor Who on Sundays, but it is cut into commercial segments, and it's not the pure viewing experience. And I don't know how many people watch it on BBC America as opposed to perhaps those who don't have cable and order it on iTunes or wait for it 3 months later to show up now on HBO Max, whereas this is the new streaming home for the modern series of Doctor Who. So how do you think BBC America is sort of dealing with this. They are not one of the big titans of like Netflix Prime or HBO in any way. So like they're kind of a smaller broadcaster, but they have a streaming home on a much larger broadcaster. How do you think Doctor Who is playing in the future now on BBC America, Derek?
Well, the thing with BBC America, of course, is that we're talking about Doctor Who, is that, of course, they're not autonomous in this. They can't sort of decide this is how we're going to do it. They have to take the lead from whatever BBC One's concerns are. So, BBC America, if you were to ask them, they might say, well, this is our ideal. We'd like to be able to schedule it here, or perhaps box set it, or do whatever they want to do. But of course, they can't do that because they have to follow the lead of what BBC One's demands are. So that's what makes it tricky, I think, is that there's more than one interested party here, and Doctor Who doesn't really fit any sort of template for anything really. This is part of the puzzle when we talk about all of this stuff, because we can talk about where the rest of the industry is going, where BBC America is going, where BBC One and is going, and all of that. But I do think, when we talk about Doctor Who, you sort of want to sort of say, well, what are other shows like Doctor Who doing? And the truth is, there aren't any other shows like Doctor Who. There never were. There never were. So, even back in the day, it was doing 25-minute episodes of sort of 4-part serials and 6-part serials. No other show was structured like that. But even by the time you got to the Sylvester McCoy years, it was such an odd thing that it was being shown in that way. I mean, literally no other program was made and shown like that. And although that's not quite the thing now, obviously we do have 45-minute contained dramas, it's still sort of confounding people, I think, a little bit as to exactly where it fits. I mean, your question about BBC America, well, it has to be this way. While Doctor Who is owned and commissioned by BBC Television, in effect by the public service, that's going to lead the way. They will have to follow. I don't think BBC America would necessarily put it on Sunday nights if it weren't for the fact that they can't go out a day early. They wouldn't be allowed, I'm sure, to put their episode on a Saturday before it had been shown in the UK. So they're kind of stuck. What do we do? Do we keep it on a Saturday but air it 6 days late, or do we put it on a Sunday, the same as the BBC, and only a few hours after the UK? I suspect, and I don't know, but I suspect BBC America probably this wasn't their ideal. To be honest, I don't think that's probably what they would ideally have wanted. But the UK transmission was deemed the more important factor there. So there's always going to be a lot of pulling and tugging on whose need is greater, I suppose. And at the moment, as it stands, the money is still basically coming from public service, but there is a lot of money coming in from the commercial side as well. So what extent does that play into it? I don't have the answers to all these questions, but I'm just trying to give your listeners an idea of the complexities of this, about the different parties that all have quite different agendas and different priorities.
Yeah, one thing I would add to that with BBC America that's happening over here is as viewers are migrating from their cable subscriptions, this is actually putting the entire endeavor of cable as we've known it, cable and satellite services as we've known it, at a bit of jeopardy, not short term, but long term. So basically, there's going to come a point where certain channels become unsustainable, precisely because they can't attract enough viewers to interest advertisers or to get their revenues they would get from carriage and cable and satellite systems. And this is already starting to happen a bit. And so basically, the bigger content owners, the bigger channel owners, the bigger brands out there, they're already preparing for this transition. They're basically, moving their brands over to the streaming platforms. And so, Disney Plus is essentially Disney gathering up its luggage and plopping it down on their streaming platform and making that the center of that. And HBO Max is the center of Warner Brothers universe. And since Viacom and CBS are together now, again, this is what Paramount Plus is doing as well. So, these channels are going to be around, MTV, Nickelodeon, et cetera, and probably BBC America are going to be around for at least a little while. But I'd have to think at some point, it's certainly within the realm of possibility that something like BBC America will just be a streaming service, or even more likely part of a streaming service that's owned by somebody else, that they're gathering subscription fees and or advertising revenue directly for that. And it doesn't really exist in the same way that it did as being a linear broadcast channel. In that scenario, that could actually improve the idea of where the commercials fall, because they don't need to fit within an hour anymore. They could just, the commercial pods work differently on streaming platforms than they do in a broadcast or cable setting. But it does change the economics, considerably. I mean, it's not outside the realm of possibility. And again, we're going heavy speculation, folks, a little bit here, but it's not outside the realm of possibility for, say, HBO Max to put in a bid. We want to exclusively carry Doctor Who in North America, and to do it on a weekly release schedule. So basically, it's the same kind of thing. It would drop on, say, a Sunday night at 8 o'clock or whatever, but only through their HBO Max platform. And you have to be a subscriber to access it. They're already doing that with Sesame Street. I mean, they already basically, from a public service broadcaster, they took Sesame Street. They bought up the rights to Sesame Street to the new episode. So it's certainly within the realm of possibility. And I don't think that will radically change the way in which most people view it here in the U.S. Will subscribe to one thing rather than another thing. But it does show how television is changing in terms of how it functions, and in terms of where the business and where the interests of sustaining that are going to be in the future. So yeah, it's still very much up in the air where the fate of BBC America and everything. But again, the trajectory is that these services are basically migrating to streaming in one way or another.
Mm-hmm. Well, while we're speculating, I mean, Tom, do you foresee perhaps a time when Doctor Who would be made to sort of be like a box set kind of TV series, that it would be a much more arc heavy kind of season that would be a bingeable sort of item?
I only see that really happening if the BBC as we know it sort of ceases to exist, basically, which means it may well happen, of course, because the BBC's longer term future is far from clear. But play back this clip and prove me wrong in a year or two when they announce that's exactly what they do. But I suspect the way that Doctor Who is currently made will kind of preclude that for the time being, and also the way that Doctor Who is used by the BBC it's whether it's a Saturday night or a Sunday night, it's a scheduled show. So I think it could happen, but I think there will be bigger things going on if and when that does happen, if that makes sense. We're just guessing here, after all. I mean, these educated guesses. Yeah. But as I say, there are a lot of factors here, and that makes it quite difficult to predict in a way, because there's more than one sort of thing where you can say, well, A to B to C, this is where it's going to go. It's not altogether clear, certainly.
It's interesting too how Doctor Who itself is bound up in these issues, which are really sort of cultural value and everything. And so that, if Doctor Who were to go that route, that would be just another terrible blow to the idea of the BBC, the idea of what it means to serve the British public in this way. And so Doctor Who has, I mean, we talk about it as being a global brand and everything like this, but it does have this important role, almost a symbolic role of a kind of, ambassador, if you will, the BBC of representing Britain to the British, to the British people. And interestingly, it didn't really have that until the show came back in some ways. I mean, I think that the show coming back has really sort of solidified it. And so now it's going to be something that is going to be there in some form or another. And it's going to be there that the BBC wants to bring out in some form or another. And to have all of the pomp and publicity whenever a new Doctor is announced, and the excitement of building up to a new season and announcing a new companion or bringing back the Daleks or whatever again. And all of that is kind of a ritual part of culture, particularly in the UK, that's still there. And so even if the audience is diminishing a little bit for that, I think there's a kind of almost warm and fuzzy, familiar sort of feeling that it's in the BBC's interest, I would think, to sustain that, as long as possible.
I agree. And I'm going to say something which is sort of, perhaps slightly provocative, but I mean, I think it's, Doctor Who's been around for almost 60 years now. And I do wonder to what extent, throughout that whole 60 years, the BBC as a whole has really ever been at any point really quite understood what they have with Doctor Who. It's because they don't have anything else like it. And I think, there have been times when the BBC has seemed actively a bit hostile towards Doctor Who, and there's been other times when the BBC has seemed much more embracing of it and proud of it. You can work out when those periods are. I think it's fairly clear, when it's been more in favour than others. But I do wonder to what extent they've ever really and I mean the controllers and commissioners and people, who make those decisions, really actually understand why on earth Doctor Who is popular at all. Because you can't say, well, it's a bit like this. It's sort of not really. It doesn't really fit anything else. Mm-hmm. It does have the problem about what you do with it. Russell T Davies, when he was talking to a BBC which at that time had not shown Doctor Who for a long, long time, and if ever they kind of sort of got it, there was kind of like, well, where does it fit in? He told them his idea of where it fitted in. I think that worked very well in 2005. Mm-hmm. Perhaps that's not the right approach now. Perhaps that idea of sort of on that post Buffy the Vampire Slayer, slightly whimsical, slightly postmodern almost approach, which worked fantastically at the time. Maybe it needs to be something else now. Now I'm slightly getting into the areas of what the show should be, but which I'll back away from because that's a whole other discussion really. But in terms of what the BBC does with it, they've always been very led by the people who actually make it to one degree or another. When they couldn't work out what to do with it in the 80s, they basically stuck John Nathan Turner back in to make it because, well, all right, if we can't cancel it, we might as well just carry on doing it the way we are. So you ended up with the sort of Sylvester McCoy years. Again, there's been, and I don't mean to disrespect anyone here, but I think there's very much a sort of feeling, they've had Russell T Davies and they've had Stephen Moffat and they've had Chris Chibnall. But I don't think there's really, from the high-ups, a sort of feeling about, well, what actually is it that makes Doctor Who work? I think they're very reliant on those creators, who know what they're doing to make a successful show. I think if there were ever more commercial demands on Doctor Who and it became like a Netflix thing or whatever, it would become clearer in some sense because the demands on Doctor Who would be commercial demands, mm-hmm. Which isn't quite where it does fit in at the moment. So in the end, it would become much more about number crunching. I've slightly drifted away from the point there, I suppose, but I do think it's interesting because I keep coming back to this, but it doesn't follow a set pattern. It doesn't follow a set. You can't look at a precedent really for anything else. Often when we look at Doctor Who viewing figures, when you look at Doctor Who, where it might go, we often end up looking back to Doctor Who itself because we can't find another better example than Doctor Who's own history. There isn't really anything else that we can say, well, it could be like that,
Yeah, the best way to figure out where Doctor Who is is to figure out where it's going and work backwards.
Yeah, I feel like the end of City of Death. Yeah, work out where you've been and sort of work backwards.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's there's a lot of guesswork here. I've had some dealings with the BBC over my time, and it's interesting, with the commercial side because they know they've got something that works and is a hit, but I'm not sure they necessarily know why. You get an awful lot of kind of market research and so on into working out why people actually like Doctor Who, and they would sometimes sort of come to you in meetings and sort of say, well, we've done this research with kids, and it turns out that kids really like the monsters, and they like the excitement, and they like the companions, and they like the Doctor. They sort of say this like this is a revelation, and you think, well. Yeah, that sounds right. I mean, I remember being a kid, and those are the things I like. But it's almost like they have to sort of do the market research to find out those things, where it sort of seems, perhaps to those of us who love it and have grown up watching it, it sort of seems self-evident, Mm-hmm. But perhaps from the outside, it looks like this very strange thing. Well, why is this popular?
It's interesting how that factors into with the showrunners having to navigate around the BBC's scheduling and commissioning kind of thing. And so, so it's moved from this thing that was an annual kind of run. We're going to have, David Tennant there every year doing this. And now it's more something that shows up for a batch of episodes every 18 months or so. And we've kind of accepted that. We've kind of said, okay, this is what its function is now. But then if you are Chris Chibnall, Doctor Who. If you're Chibnall, you obviously know Doctor Who and what that means. But you have to figure out, okay, hey, how do I make Doctor Who? How do we continue to make Doctor Who work in these kind of contexts and restrictions? If it can't be something that's an ongoing annual thing, if it is going to be a bit more sporadic on its schedule and everything, how do we keep that interest going? How do I keep the public sort of interested? And how do I keep telling these stories in these sorts of ways, and lots of challenges with that. This isn't to say that it wasn't certainly plenty challenging in every other era, but these days, it's hard to navigate that, and not knowing, how long the seasons are going to be. I'm talking from the producer's perspective, how long the seasons are going to be, how many years the Doctor is going to be able to be contracted for, and those sorts of things. And so it's and yet still make it Doctor Who, still keep making it recognizably Doctor Who. So
Yes, obviously we're probably all a bit more understanding in the year 2021 because the making television generally has rather changed in the last few months in terms of how quickly you can make it. How the sort of restrictions you have. Obviously, they've announced, I think, you can correct me exactly how this was worded, but I think they've sort of said that there will be a number of episodes for the next series, but they sounded a little bit non-committal, partly because, to be fair, they really don't know how long it was going to take to make the episodes. Mm-hmm. But even before the current situation, which I think will be very understanding about all of that. There was always sort of a thing that we were sort of slightly getting away from a fixed schedule. I think it's fair to say, Doctor Who sort of would tend to sort of pop up when it was ready and when it would come on, and there were again all sorts of factors which would contribute to that. I suspect, from a commercial point of view, it's much more helpful to be able to say we will have this number of episodes at this time every year, because you're trying to balance the books basically from a financial point of view, from a knowing what your customers are expecting and all of that. It's just that I think again Doctor Who sort of tends to slip a little from that, and it hasn't always been quite that straightforward, shall we say? Yeah, it's hard. Again, perhaps, you might be more knowledgeable than me about certain other shows, about how well they sort of stick to a regular schedule. I think things have changed, haven't they? Because, back when I was a teenager and I used to I loved watching Star Trek The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine and Voyager, and you would get your 26 episode series, mm-hmm. and they would be on every year from sort of September, October time right the way through to May, or give or take, and that would be fixed, and they would run for 7 years solid, and they wouldn't really deviate from that. Whereas now, we look at something like Star Trek, and I think the latest series of Discovery was up weekly on Netflix at the start of this year, but it's been some time since the previous run again, and I don't think that was all to do with the pandemic. It was things are sort of ready when they're ready. It feels mm-hmm. like that's the way things are going. I don't know quite what all those reasons might be, but clearly clearly things aren't quite as regimented as perhaps they used to be.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And the only things that are really in a scripted sense are the ones that are the easiest. Not that anything's easy, but in ideal circumstances, without a pandemic, the crime procedurals and series like this, where they can kind of go on a schedule and do these sorts of stories and these kinds of settings and stuff, and keep cranking them out. And so series like NCIS, and over here we've got Chicago Fire and Chicago Med, and these sorts of series can just keep cranking out those episodes on that kind of traditional broadcast schedule. But yeah, you're right. Anything that's kind of doing something different, or as other sorts of production demands and everything on it, is much more likely to be. We're going to make a series of a season of 10 episodes this year. The next season's going to come in 18 months or 2 years or whatever. Or I think in the case of The Mandalorian, I think they shot the first 2 seasons back to back, and then they aired them in consecutive years. So they kind of banked a bunch of episodes and then did that so they could do that. But yeah, it's much more common to these days for those sorts of shows. It's ready, like you said, it's ready when it's ready. And then you're going to have to wait.
Yes, and things were moving in that direction. But let's face it, that having a global pandemic is only going to make things even less clear than they were before. So it's probably actually pushed things further along in that direction than they might otherwise have gone. We make the number of episodes we can make. You can't. Yeah. We're all only human. We can only. We don't know. That's the simple thing. We don't necessarily know. I know shows that have had to sort of cut series short or compromise. Not do quite what they wanted to do, precisely because of this. So I think his Dark Materials, I was gathering, they basically cut an episode out of their series in the end. They had to cut it short. So we're kind of in unusual times, to put it mildly.
Yeah, so it's having an impact even beyond the sorts of things that were already impacting production and the way things are going. So yeah, and I think as you were saying earlier, where things are going to go even after the pandemic, I think some of these tendencies, some of these trends they're going to stick around in terms of how things are made and when they're going to be made.
I suspect that in all sorts of ways, the pandemic will have an effect, which actually, even after that, once things sort of go back to normal, in inverted commas, there will be some things which don't go back to normal, because there will be a sort of thought, well, actually, we don't need to go back to the way we did it before. We've now got a different way of doing it. So that's going to be very interesting to see, not just in TV production, but in so many parts of the way the world works. It's going to change things. That's a very big area of discussion. We maybe should narrow it back down.
That's true. Yeah. I feel like perhaps like season 2 of the Mandalorian, and we've created like many spin-off podcast episodes in the course of this one. As a way of wrapping up, I kind of I, like all humans, try to see patterns and things that aren't there, but in regards to what the BBC felt about Doctor Who, and not realizing what they had, and being very behind it. I sort of, I find a parallel between the BBC's enthusiasm behind Doctor Who leading up to its 20th anniversary and to its 50th anniversary. It's this big thing. It was a big event. And then after that, it almost kind of felt tough to, almost impossible really, to sort of match that sort of enthusiasm for a show. Like, hey, let's celebrate the 51st anniversary now of Doctor Who. You can't really do that. It's been 7, going on 8 years since the 50th anniversary of Doctor Who. Where do you think the pros and cons are for the BBC now with regards to Doctor Who? How are they feeling about the show that we all love and we all sort of consider the flagship of the BBC? But where do you think Doctor Who sort of sits in the BBC's eyes now?
Well, gosh, that's a big question. I mean, yes, it's interesting you mention anniversaries and things, because we're far closer now to getting to the 60th than anywhere to the 50th. And I'm sure that will be somewhere in their thinking as well. They're a bit double-edged, aren't they, anniversaries? Because they're sort of reminding you about how old something is, while you're simultaneously wanting to, look to the future and not appear old. You want to be the big, sexy new thing. And of course, even in its modern form, it's hard for Doctor Who to really appear as the sexy new thing. It's just not. Let's be clear about this. However much we love it, you can't always be new. Doctor Who probably can be new more than a lot of shows can. That's its advantage. It can reinvent itself. It gets a new cast, a new Doctor predominantly, but new approaches. I do think the BBC has never. They're still very, very devoted and loyal to it, which perhaps wasn't always the case, particularly in the 1980s. But I just wonder to what extent they quite know what to do with it and what they have. I'm just raising that as a question. I'm not trying to be sort of overly critical here, but I'm not sure I necessarily know what the answer is. Do any of us know what the answer is? What do you do with a show which has been around for that long? And yes, it does have this sort of ability to regenerate itself, to reinvigorate itself. But how do you keep it seeming fresh and relevant and new? I think you probably muddle on through doing what you always do. It's probably the answer, which isn't a very sort of reassuring answer in a way. We'll just carry on doing what we always do and hope for the best. But that's sort of very Doctor Who, isn't it? It's very that kind of is what Doctor Who does, and I suspect is what will see it through. I do think that it's hard. Doctor Who will always be a flagship of sorts, but it can't be the exciting new thing all the time. It can't be. Nothing can. And I think it's fair to say, again, I don't want to sound critical or like I'm casting around sort of aspersions in any way, but Doctor Who isn't that thing at the moment. It was probably for quite a long time, from 2005 right up to the 50th anniversary. I think it kind of held on to that. But, it's just the way the world works. You can't still be the new thing when you're not new. So, the 60th will be an interesting thing to see how they go, because there's clearly a commercial opportunity there. There's an opportunity to make a big celebration. But it is double-edged, I think, as the 50th has found, maybe even back in the day, even the 20th found. Other anniversaries were generally when the show was off air, in the 30th and the 40th and so on, so it was a bit different. But you can have a big old celebration, but you're sort of also reminding people how old this thing is. And I'm not sure telling people that something's very old is necessarily the way to attract people. So I don't know. The short answer is I don't know quite where we're going with all this, but I think in the longer term, Doctor Who will survive, but it will have to come to an end again at some point. Let's just come out and say it. There will be a point when it goes off air again. And that's nothing to be scared of. I think now we can look at it and say, well, that's happened before. That's sort of the way it goes sometimes. But I think Doctor Who will endure as a thing, as an idea, and it will probably change again in ways that we can't predict. But in the end, if you keep on doing the same thing, eventually you're going to find that the world has sort of changed around you. That's sort of the way I look at it. I think it's been a remarkable run this time. And I'm aware I'm sort of talking like it's all about to finish. I don't think it's about to finish at all. But I do think there is probably some sort of change, whatever form that takes. I think there is a change probably coming somewhere in the next 4 or 5 years, which is still quite a long time, of course, in TV terms. You can have series that only run for 3 or 4 years very successfully. So if you're talking that far ahead, you're still... that's still quite a long way, but does that make sense? I think things will change, but it's going to be difficult to predict exactly how.
Derek, the last word then, similar grounds, but perhaps from an American perspective.
Oh my! I think I totally agree with what Tom was saying. I think it has been around a long time. I was just doing the math in my head. If in comparison to the classic series, because of all of your listeners are fans, we'd be at approximately City of Death in the run at this point, 16 years in. So that's a deep well into the show, and it's not a new show. The modern series is not new anymore. What's interesting, though, is if you think about every few years, whether it's the classic series or the modern series, Doctor Who has reinvented itself, has become something, and I think this is in its favor, that it's something that is difficult to pin down. And so, any 5-year stretch, you could take a look at episodes every 5 years or so, and it's a different show, with not only different casts and everything, but a different approach, a different sensibility with this. The question is, I guess, how far you could stretch that in order to sustain a kind of relevance. I think an important point we should hit in a good way, hopefully, is that we will get creators, writers in particular at this point, who grew up watching Christopher Eccleston and David Tennant and Matt Smith when they were in school and found this show and are coming into it now in their 20s and 30s wanting to create for it. I think if Doctor Who can go over that hurdle and fit the changing nature of British culture, as the casting of Jodie Whittaker has done and the casting of other people, to sustain that momentum, to keep that going, I think it could still be around for a while in a variety of forms. The other thing, even if it goes off, there's even a model for that, which is what we call the wilderness years, right? So that the show stops being made, but the BBC keeps licensing products and keeps licensing materials. So I would imagine, hypothetically, if they were to rest it, quote unquote, for a bit, Big Finish would still be able to produce its audios, for example, and they would still license other sorts of merchandise because there's this long, rich history of material they could draw from, and it's still enough of an interest in what that history was for people to keep producing it in that way. So I think as a flagship of the BBC, as in that sort of role, I totally agree with Tom. I think that's lots of things could shake out in the next 4 or 5 years to where it is beyond that. I think it's solid for this next coming years, but after that, lots of moving pieces to that question. To where it's going to go. But again, the series has surprised us in the past, and so it may yet be around.
And we'll end it there. Fascinating chat, gentlemen. Thank you very much, Tom Spilsbury and Derek Kompare. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, chaps. That was an interesting chat to be a part of. So thanks both to Derek and Tom for agreeing to that at fairly short notice, too, as it sort of came together really quickly. Like I said, I sort of kicked this thing down the road until maybe sometime in the summer, but now was the time. And with the news that happened with new BBC channels and stuff, how remarkably prescient, not at all prescient, just a complete coincidence.
How remarkably coincidental.
Yep.
Quite coincidental.
Yeah, it was. So, all right, that's it for this week here, everyone. Until next time, I am Stephen in Edmonton.
Warren in Vancouver.
And Chris in Edmonton.
So long for now.
You've been listening to Radio Free Skaro. Find us online at radiofreeskaro.com. Follow us on Twitter and Tumblr at Radio Free Skaro. Subscribe to us on iTunes and donate to the show at patreon.com/Radio Free Skaro. Thank you.